Hey campers, this is NPS Ranger News. Our program features the amazing work of National Park Service Rangers, protecting people and parks across the country through law enforcement, search and rescue, emergency medicine, firefighting, and other emergency services. I'm Greg Jackson, your host. NPS Ranger News updates news stories every day as they happen, both on Facebook and Twitter. On Facebook, find us at /NPS Ranger News. On Twitter, we're at NPS_Ranger. With me today is John Hearn. John Hearn is a district ranger, works at the Natchez Trace Parkway. And the reason I wanted to talk to you, John, is something I saw a couple months ago, was the use of unmarked vehicles at the Natchez Trace Parkway. Thanks for being with me today.
And thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Natchez Trace Parkway. Tell me a little bit about the park.
So we're unique in the Park Service. We're one of a handful of essentially roads that travel. The Natchez Trace Parkway in particular goes through 3 states, over 444 miles. It basically runs from just outside of Nashville, Tennessee, down to Natchez, Mississippi.
So the parkway is about 444 or so miles long. How wide is it?
There is no set width. Everybody thinks that we own 50 yards from the center line, but the boundary is actually wildly drawn. It just kind of depends on what land was ceded to us back in the 1930s when the park was originally created. So some places we may literally be, the park, the width of the road and a few yards, and in other places, we're a couple hundred yards deep. It just depends. It's part of the challenge here is knowing where the boundary is.
Why was the park created?
So the park was created for a variety of reasons. Primarily, it was created to commemorate the history of what we would refer to as the Old Southwest. So everybody forgets that in the late 1700s, early 1800s, civilization, as we thought of it, largely ended at Nashville, Tennessee. And everything that you would think of in the Southwest, what would later become Alabama, Mississippi, was the wilderness. So many of the problems that we would later encounter as the United States expanded into the West, those classic Western themes, cowboys and Indians, outlaws, robbers, people struggling in the wilderness, all those same events took place in this area in the late 1700s and early 1800s. So that's a big part of what the Trace does, is commemorate that history. The Natchez Trace itself was a pre-Columbian road that has existed for a long time. It was a Native American trade route. For a long time before the invention of steam, people would actually float down the Ohio River, deliver their goods to Mississippi, and the Natchez Trace Parkway was how they got back home, either by horseback or foot. Again, before the invention of steam, largely ended the use of the Natchez Trace.
So the Natchez Trace Parkway, as part of the National Park Service, there's visitor centers, there's interpretive exhibits and signs along the highway or the road as the trace as you go. However, there's a certain percentage. What percentage of people who are driving the Natchez Trace Parkway are regular commuters versus park people there to just come and visit the park?
So I would say the parkway, depending on which area you're in, kind of varies in nature. But in especially the 2 districts that are in Mississippi, a very large percentage of the use of the parkway is by people commuting to and from. We connect effectively, I think, the largest metropolitan area in the state with the number 3rd or 4th metropolitan area. So we have a lot of people using the parkway to get from point A to point B that are not what you would think of as a traditional visitor. Think of our traditional visitors actually coming to enjoy the history of the parkway, probably are in the single-digit percentages as far as that goes.
Okay, that's where I was going with this, because I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about traffic enforcement and something I saw a couple months ago about you guys experimenting with or trying unmarked vehicles for traffic enforcement. How did that come about?
So the Trace has had a very serious commitment to visitor safety, and that tends to focus extensively on traffic safety here, because that's where the majority of our fatalities occur. This is not something that just suddenly developed, but this has been a very long-term, ongoing process. The Parkway has been very good about going out there, doing the research. We've attended the large national traffic safety conferences, trying to get information to improve our programs. So the unmarked vehicles was part of a much larger picture, trying to reduce our traffic fatalities and injuries. We, like the rest of the United States, there has been a huge uptick in traffic fatalities starting around 2008. For years before that, for decades before 2008, those traffic fatalities nationwide have been going down. And just like in 2008, they started to increase nationally. They started to increase on the Parkway as well. So I would say historically we were probably running in the single digits in numbers of our fatalities, but we've pretty much been running in the double digits ever since 2008. Some of those have garnered some media attention. You know, we had, for instance, a Canadian couple that was motorcycling down the Parkway that was struck by a drunk driver. Both of the Canadian tourists died as a result of that. So again, this is taking place in the larger context of trying to make the public safer.
Sure. Let's go through the larger context then. Let's go with some of the other steps that are being taken for traffic safety, and then we'll go to this specific one.
So one of the advantages we have on the Parkway here that has helped us tremendously is that we have a well-implemented, what we would call CAD, or computer dispatch system. So literally every ranger activity since about August of 2012 is logged. And we can go back and look at where our areas of activity are and correlate those with areas where we have accidents. And again, matching a larger natural trend, the more rural areas of the Parkway that get less enforcement activity tend to be where our higher accidents are. People think that, you know, we have a lot of accidents around the metro areas, whether it's Tupelo or Jackson. But if you look at the actual rate of accidents, they're actually fairly safe areas because of the large volume of traffic. It's actually our more rural areas that we have the higher fatality rates. And again, that mirrors the national trend. So part of this has been trying to better direct our patrol resources to those areas to make sure they're getting the enforcement that they need. The other thing that we've done, for instance, we have the flashing speed boards that tell you how fast you're going. Well, we can also use those just to monitor traffic and get traffic counts and look for speeding trends and, you know, those concerns. And what that allows us to do is we can put the board out there 24/7. It certainly beats, you know, we couldn't ever staff that location, and that would allow us, for instance, if we have early morning commuter traffic at 5:30 that's regularly running 25 miles an hour over the speed limit, then we can again put the patrol resources out there to deal with those vehicles as well. It's a way to, you know, basically get the most bang for our buck because we're not wasting the manpower of putting somebody out there where there may be a problem. We're trying to allocate our resources where we know there is a problem.
Sure. Are you able to quantify improvements based on where those signs are?
Well, so the signs have been used for two things. If we use them in a flashing display mode, they really do. The lingo is traffic calming. They really do tend to slow everybody down. What we use them for is more of a monitoring function. So we'll actually turn the display off, and people don't know that their speeds are being checked and the vehicles are being counted, which gives us a better idea about what's actually going on in those areas. So I don't have the numbers in front of me, but like when, if you can put the board up with the light on, run it for a week, and then come back another week and turn the board on, and you're always going to see a drop in the average speed through an area. That's well documented, not just here, but that's there's a lot of good data out there about the effect of the speed boards.
So targeted enforcement, data collection, and responding to what the data says, so a data-driven program targeting where the problems are. Any other components?
Just trying to get the best equipment to do the job. So, for instance, most of our traffic enforcement is done with radar, and that's good for our more wide-open areas. But one of the things we deal with is when you're dealing with a lot of commuter traffic, you have a very high traffic density that makes radar a suboptimal tool to enforce that. So, we purchased what we think of as laser or LiDAR units. Every district has at least one LiDAR unit available to it, and that allows rangers to better pick out reckless drivers during periods of high traffic that we just simply would not have been able to have detected in any other with traditional methods.
There's some sort of guiding philosophy or strategy for dealing with traffic enforcement?
A lot of times the problem that we're confronting within the parks are already being addressed outside of the parks. So traffic enforcement has traditionally been looked at as what we commonly call the 4 E's. So that's engineering, education, enforcement, and emergency services. And we worked really hard to fine-tune all those here on the Parkway. Education, we regularly outreach to people. Our visitor center is aware, pushes the traffic safety message. I've been on TV. My boss has been on TV way more than I ever thought I would have, trying to keep the public educated about these concerns. As far as emergency services go, the state itself has done a much better job about getting medevac helicopters onto scenes quickly in an effort to treat people who are injured. So that leads us to the next E, which is engineering. And that's where the Trace faces some of its unique challenges. So the Parkway was designed intentionally to create a feeling of, I guess, isolation and to make you think you're in the wilderness like the original people who were using it were. So that means that the road does not look like a traditional highway. So each lane is a foot more narrow than a conventional highway. That means that you've lost 2 feet separating you from a possible head-on collision. It also means that you're a foot closer to the fog line, the white line on the side of the road, which means it's very, leaving your lane has a lot more serious consequences. The problem is, for instance, if a vehicle drops off to the right side, the shoulders are not paved. That goes back to the original road design just as well, as the roads being, adding shoulders to our roadways being largely cost prohibitive at this point. But it typically means that if a vehicle leaves the roadway, they go into a soft shoulder, it's very easy for them to overcorrect and end up in the opposite lane. And because of the nature of the Parkway, again, the trees are not clear cut. This does not look like an interstate. The trees are closer, which means that that kind of accident can have fairly significant impact when that vehicle hits a tree. If you hit head on, the airbag deploys. Cars are really designed to take damage that way. But when the driver's compartment takes a side impact from a large oak tree, there's just not much that you can do car design wise there. So we face a lot of engineering challenges as well that we just, it's impossible to remediate. So that leaves us with the last E of enforcement, which is kind of what we're talking about, what we've been trying to do to get as much bang for the buck when it comes to making the public as safe as possible with the resources we have on hand.
Well, the program seems quite safety-driven. I know here in Ohio, where I live, is a lot of the communities. The traffic enforcement program is revenue-driven. It's where there's stop photo enforcement, and there's a significant portion of municipal income comes from citations. I would imagine that's the same thing there. Do you get? And I know with the federal government things are different. Do you end up having to explain that to people?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest mythologies that we run around with is that we write the volume of tickets that we do because we're generating revenue. We're certain that's just not the case. We're writing the number of tickets to try and promote the safety. The tickets we write, if somebody simply pays the fine, there's a $30 processing fee that goes to a separate agency that processes that ticket, but the remainder of the fine actually goes to the Victim Witness Protection Program that the federal government runs. So the fines actually go to pay for, people who have lost loved ones, to help with expenses traveling to trials. So it's actually going to a fairly good cause. If somebody actually shows up in court and is found guilty, those fines don't come back to the Parkway either. Fines that are as a result of trials, DUIs, anything like that, just generally end up going to the general treasury. So the Natchez Trace Parkway doesn't earn a single dollar from the tickets that it actually writes. We actually spend a good amount of money writing those tickets. We're in the process of moving to an e-ticketing program to try to make ourselves more efficient. And if I'm speaking correctly, I think there's an $800 per ranger license for access to that software. So writing tickets actually costs us money.
Okay, wow, that's a steep license, but I guess the paper doesn't get lost or fall out the window or get blown out the window, and you don't have to keep all the citations around to turn them in at headquarters if it's done electronically.
Yeah, absolutely, and it improves the whole efficiency of the operation. Those tickets get pushed directly to dispatch, and they don't have to read our handwriting when they go to interim for us, which our dispatchers are huge fans of the e-ticketing because a ranger's handwriting is really not hired for their penmanship, let's just say that.
Terrific. Well, the thing that I wanted to get back to is the thing that I did see that seemed unique is using an unmarked vehicle for enforcement, and I've seen states do that in certain areas. The National Park Service I haven't seen. So how did that come about?
I wish we could claim that this was an incredible, brilliant plan that we executed, but it was much more of an inadvertent discovery. So for years, we would get complaints about reckless driving in particular areas. Typically what you'll see is that you have the majority of the public that's complying with our traffic regulations. They're maybe driving the posted speed limit or only 5 miles an hour over. And because of the twisting, turning nature of the Parkway, when you get to a large passing zone, you'll get people that are trying to pass multiple vehicles, literally running 90 miles an hour to try to pass 6 cars at a time. And we would get complaints about this on a regular basis. And we would, adjust patrols. We would send people out to work that. But for some unknown reason, when there's a marked patrol car working that area, all of a sudden everybody's driving perfectly correctly. Nobody's driving recklessly. And we literally struggled with this for years because we knew we had the problems, but we really didn't have a good way to address it. So the supervisors on the Parkway have traditionally driven an unmarked vehicle in as much as a police package, Crown Vic or Ford utility with a spotlight on it is an unmarked vehicle. But they weren't primarily engaged in traffic enforcement. So in an absolute accident, supervisor left the Parkway. The new district ranger didn't want that particular vehicle, so it got transferred up to here. Given how long it takes to get a set of markings for the vehicle, we had no choice but to run that vehicle unmarked until we could get the striping materials for it. And this is a Chevy Tahoe, no light bar on top. It's got a full lighting package in it, so there's no mistaking it for anything else but a law enforcement vehicle. But it was effectively an unmarked vehicle. Well, all of a sudden, the same guy that had been operating in a Dodge Charger, unable to write any of these reckless driving tickets, is just literally tearing up the road. People passing him, a huge number, dramatic increase in the actual amount of violations that he was able to detect. So one of the nice things I mentioned earlier, that we have a very effective CAD system running here. One of the nice things we were able to do is actually go back and look at the ranger assigned the unmarked vehicle, his activity, the 6 months prior to using the unmarked vehicle and the 6 months afterwards. And obviously there's going to be effect because it's effectively a new toy and somebody may be working harder. But, the stuff that we really see driving our accidents, the following too closely, unsafe operation, basically kind of an inattentive driving, the gross speeding violations, there was a huge increase in his ability to detect those violations. So pulling the data from the CAD, as best we can tell, for instance, his citations for following too closely went up over 600%. His citations for unsafe operation went up over 250%. And the grosser speeding violations, 25 plus over, which is basically exceeding the posted speed limit by more than 50%, went up 200%. And just other violations like not wearing a seatbelt, improper passing, running stop signs, the less gross speeds, all those saw, increases as well, ranging from an 80 to 166% increase. So we were like, holy smokes, that is actually impressive results that it's really, really hard to argue with. So once we saw that, we definitely decided to try to expand out the fleet of unmarked cars. For instance, we have a Dodge pickup. It's a police package pickup, but it's not white, which is huge when people are used to seeing white patrol cars. That has been tremendously successful, and we're basically slowly rolling out this program as vehicles are turned in and new vehicles come in. I think the goal is that every supervisor will be driving an unmarked vehicle that is not white, and there will also be one more unmarked vehicle assigned to the district. So there will effectively be two in the district.
How's the public reaction to this?
So the public reaction has been interesting. Again, we're on TV on a regular basis, but definitely the unmarked vehicles was a very, very hot button issue. There's a lot of confusion about what is and isn't an unmarked vehicle, and one of the things we tried really hard to do was to make sure there was no doubt about who was contacting you. So we say it's an unmarked vehicle, for instance, a blue Dodge pickup, but there's a full interior light bar. There's lights on the mirror, the headlights are flashing, there's a large LED on the front of the car, so it looks covert, but it actually has blue and red flashing lights. So there was a lot of opposition from some of the locals as far as the use of the unmarked vehicles. But we, to the best of my knowledge, we're not getting people, claiming they didn't know it was a police officer trying to contact them or anything like that. Because again, we work so hard to make sure the vehicles are properly equipped with emergency warning lights. But, most of the time people aren't going to be happy when they get a speeding ticket, regardless of, what vehicle you use to write them that ticket.
Have you been able to detect any changes in traffic behavior? Are people slowing down now more in those areas that are known to have the unmarked vehicles in it?
It certainly seems to have had a net overall effect. I can't give you hard numbers on what the actual effect has been, but just from the amount of media attention it garnered and some of the chatter, in social media, the public is very much aware of it. We regularly see comments in social media groups about be careful that Trace uses unmarked vehicles. So even though the unmarked vehicles are a small percentage of our fleet, they seem to have a very disproportionate effect on the public's perception as far as their risks of getting caught speeding or violating other traffic laws on the Parkway.
And park management, they're the ones that end up getting the complaint phone calls and the complaint letters. How was the attitude toward that at the beginning? Was there a bit of skepticism, and how has that changed over time?
Our management team has been very supportive of the law enforcement function. They care just as much about making the public safe as we do. And, I hate to say we were banging our heads willing to try most anything, but that was largely the situation we were in. We've done some things such as streamlining the law enforcement operation as far as, how tickets are entered. And that had a huge impact as far as the amount of tickets the Rangers were writing. But overall, the management team has been very supportive of making sure we have the tools that we need. They're willing to take the heat that is generated, but quite frankly, the results largely speak for themselves. I credit our CAD system and our ability to pull those hard numbers. A lot of parks don't have that. And I think that's, for any other park that's listening to this and wanting to implement it, if you can show the numbers, then it's really, really hard to argue with hard facts.
John, one other thing I noticed in the news regarding the Natchez Trace Parkway is traffic checkpoints. You had a rather large one that was in the news. How are the traffic checkpoints working for you?
They've been very effective. Again, we tried to, I'm not sure the word profile is the right word, but basically we were trying to figure out, who's actually dying on the parkway. And we saw the same factors over and over again in the people that were actually dying on the parkway. So obviously, impairment either on drugs or alcohol is a very common factor. Speed's a common factor. But there were other things such as unlicensed drivers. A very large percentage of the people that are dying on the parkway shouldn't have even been operating that vehicle to begin with. They were either, their license had expired, their driver's license had been suspended often multiple times. So they really shouldn't have been operating the vehicle to begin with. So one of the best tools that we have to do to make sure that the vehicles that are running up and down the parkway are actually operated by licensed drivers is to run these traffic safety checkpoints where we can actually check the drivers, make sure they have the license. The state does require that they be having insurance as well. And it also gives us a chance to check for impaired drivers. So we've historically run those checkpoints based on basically when we have the personnel to do so. They tend to be very manpower intensive, but we run a couple a year, and they always generate a huge volume of citations for us. We get a lot of unlicensed drivers off of the road, occasionally arrest people with warrants there. But again, that's not necessarily our main point. The main target, especially when we run them early in the morning, is to get the unlicensed drivers off the road and also to pick up any impaired drivers. People that aren't familiar with this are kind of shocked that people would be drunk driving at 6 o'clock in the morning. But a lot of times they're, haven't gone to bed yet, or they're chronic alcoholics who are never really, really sober on their way to work. So people are surprised at the DUIs we get in the mornings, but they're definitely out there.
Okay, John Hearn, thanks so much for talking to me today.
It's been my pleasure. If we can do anything else for you, just let me know.
Well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate the work you guys are putting in at the Natchez Trace Parkway with public safety in mind. It sounds terrific. Thanks again. Well, campers, that's all for now. Check back for new shows every few days. Breaking news comes out when it happens on Twitter and Facebook. Thanks for listening. And in case you haven't figured it out, NPS Ranger News isn't affiliated with the government. I'm Greg Jackson for NPS Ranger News. See you on the trail.